I'm James Duthie. Listen to the Underrated Podcast with Braden and Matt.
Hello guys, and welcome to the 10th official episode of the Underrated podcast where we talk to you guys about sports, rant about a bunch of stuff that we think should be ranted about. Today we have a very special guest joining us for our 10th episode. He is the host of TSN's Hockey Coverage, along with the IHF World Junior Hockey Championships, the Grey Cup, and the MLS Cup. He is a 4-time Canadian Screen Award winner, a 3-time Gemini Award winner, and he launched a podcast in 2017 called the Rubber Boots Podcast, where he talks about sports and other topics. James Duthie, thank you so much for coming on, James. How are you?
It's a pleasure, Braden, and it's a pleasure, Matt. I'm doing well, all things considered, seeing that there's no sports to talk about, but we're surviving.
Yeah, and again, we thank you so much for coming on. Like, this is huge for us. Again, we're just trying to gain a few followers, and to have you on, it's just a huge honor. And so we thank you so much for coming on. I think we're going to start right off.
Hey, I was there too one time when I was a young budding broadcaster, so anytime I can help guys like yourself, my pleasure.
Yeah, and I think a reason that we kind of came to you is that you actually released the podcast, and you're almost like, I think you're over 100 episodes into your Rubber Boots podcast, if I'm not mistaken, a bunch of seasons.
Yeah, we lost track somewhere along the way. We were making fun earlier this year about how we were going to celebrate our 100th episode, and I think we blew by it without actually even mentioning it. But and they're fun things to do. I'm glad you guys are doing one.
And we've obviously heard, like, in the intro that you've won a lot of stuff. Like, you're very successful, and it's obviously a huge accomplishment from you from, when you started your career. But, like, is there still something that you're looking for? Is there still something on your bucket list that you haven't done yet that you want to achieve in the future?
That's a really good first question. And thank you for the compliments. I think that you always want to get better. Certainly, if you ever sit there and get complacent, that's when you will screw up and be awful. And so I think in any job, every day you try to improve and look for ways to get better. I don't know that there's one event. The World Cup of Soccer, I was fortunate enough to do a Women's World Cup a few years ago when it was in Canada, which was really fun to cover. Christine Sinclair and Kadisha Buchanan and Team Canada in that event. I think that when the Men's World Cup comes here to Canada, that would be a really cool thing to do. Soccer's not my favorite sport, but it's up there, certainly top 5, and that's the biggest sporting event in the world. But you're right. I've been really lucky that if I had a bucket list, let's say when I was your age, I would probably say Stanley Cup final, Super Bowl, Grey Cup. The Masters was always a big thing for me. An NBA final. Olympics was also right near the top of my list. And I've been so lucky to be able to do all those things that, I think it's when you don't have something that really sticks out in your mind that you haven't done, you feel pretty lucky.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. I kind of have a question here as well. What is the achievement that you've kind of been most proud of throughout your career in broadcasting, or any specific or anything really?
That's a good one, Matt. I don't sit there and I don't think there's one event. Maybe the 2010 Olympics, if you were talking about, one event I was proud of, because the Olympics are kind of like studying for a whole bunch of exams, or maybe the bar law exams. You study for about 6 months. And for that Olympics, I felt I knew something about every single athlete in those games. And I didn't need to know nearly that much. I realized when I actually did it, because you end up, my job as a host, you talk for like 1 minute and then you throw to an event for 3 hours. So I used about 3% of everything I knew, which was kind of frustrating in a way. But when you do feel like you are prepared, that's when you're a better broadcaster, I think, because you can relax more. The times that I'm not relaxed or that I'm nervous are when I'm not prepared, which happens once in a while. So, go ahead.
Yeah, so, and you did do, again, the 2010 Olympics.
Yeah.
And you did the 2012 games in London. Does that also compare to the Olympics, or like those kind of like?
Yeah, well, I would just say the 2010 games, because they were in Canada, I think that's a once in a lifetime, and just the way things worked out with, the golden goal and winning the gold medal. And I don't think I'll ever get to cover an event like that in my lifetime again. And so, I don't know if that's an accomplishment. I guess it is. It was more an opportunity, I think, than an accomplishment, but I didn't screw it up, I guess. And really, as a host, I think your job is to not, do something incredible. Your job is to just not screw it up. Your job is to let the experts beside you do most of the talking and hopefully make them look good. And you're just trying to get everybody from point A to point B kind of smoothly. And if you try to make it about yourself when you're a host, I think, it's different. If you're on one of those shows in the States, one of those big talk shows where you're the host and they want big personalities, Stephen A. Smith or whatever, that's a different story. But if you're a host in the way that I'm a host, where you're just hosting the event, introducing it, doing the intermissions or whatever, I think you're just trying not to get in the way and not screw it up. So, yeah, I guess the Olympics would be that. But, I just think being able to work at TSN and do all these different things for 20 years, I think cumulatively that's more of what I'm most proud of, I think, is career-wise.
All right. I'm going to kind of throw back to TSN again. When did you start your career path in broadcasting, really?
So how old are you guys?
I'm 15.
I'm 16.
Okay, so when I was your age, I still thought I could play pro football, which was, in retrospect, probably pretty ridiculous. I was like 5'10" and 150 pounds playing high school football, but I thought I could maybe play in the CFL. And as soon as that dream died at maybe, I guess my last year of high school, I was going to try and play in university, but I pretty much knew I wasn't going to play pro football. So I was looking at other things. What could be the next best thing? If you can't be a pro athlete, what's the next best thing? And broadcasting seemed like the next best thing to me. So I took journalism at Carleton. TSN wasn't very big back then. It was a whole different world. There weren't that many jobs, so I ended up getting a job as a news reporter. So I actually worked as a news reporter, the guys you see on the 6 o'clock news covering the murders and the fires or the COVID crisis. And I did that for 7 years, basically, before I got my break in sports and got to TSN in 98. So I did a little bit of sports on local news, and I guess that's how they saw me or discovered me or whatever word you want to use. And then got to TSN. So that's the kind of roundabout way. I always wanted to do sports, but I ended up doing TV in a different way, which I think really helped me. I think being a news reporter really actually made me a better writer and a more well-rounded reporter. And I don't think that I would have had whatever success I've had at TSN if I didn't get a chance to do all those things.
Not only were you on TSM, you're also moving towards Trade Center too, and you've been on Trade Center for a while too. And it was kind of also on TSN. Have you had a favorite moment maybe on TSN, so far at least in your career?
Oh, that's funny. I don't know if they've been on Trade Center. I've had a lot of awkward moments on Trade Center for sure. A favorite moment. I mean, I've had favorite events. Again, the weird thing about TV is that you don't kind of look back and remember. I remember all the bloopers, all the funny stuff that went wrong is what you remember. I never sit there and go, man, I did that one panel with Bob McKenzie back in 2006, and that was a great moment, right? You don't. Yeah. That's kind of not what we do. I remember more I wrote. This is going to be a shameless plug, but somewhere back here.
Go ahead.
So I've written these books, and I feel like when you write a book, it's more memorable because it's there and it's like a little piece of tiny artwork or whatever. And TV is just kind of, you do it and poof, it's gone, right? Yeah. It just kind of disappears, except some of the stories that live on YouTube. So I think probably the long-winded answer to that question is the kind of the spoofy stuff we've done. And I don't know if you guys are too young to have seen these things, but if you're bored on YouTube one day, we did a bunch of stories with Luongo, which are really silly. We did a video called Puck Over Glass. Another video called Don't Take My Goal Away, which is just kind of songs about hockey, and we do really stupid videos. And in some ways, I think those are my favorite moments from television.
Is that something, or maybe there's something that behind the scenes that people don't see on TV is something that could be considered one of your favorite moments? Something that people don't see maybe when they're watching in the morning? Yeah, sure. I mean,
the best thing about my job, and I wrote about this in my book, but where are you guys from?
We're from like Whippy area.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Around the Whippy area.
there's I don't know if, again, you remember, there was a story we got to do. I got to do a little documentary on a boy named Jonathan Petra, who was called
I remember that
Butterfly
one.
Child.
Yeah.
So, because I would have never got to know him if not for my job. He wouldn't, he was a big fan of sports and TSN, so he came into the station. I get to know him. We get to be friends. And this is this amazing kid who's like the toughest kid I've ever met, who teaches you so much about life. And to me, those are the best moments, like, getting to hang out with him off camera. Chris Beaudry, who's the assistant coach of the Humboldt Broncos, who was driving 15 minutes behind the bus. I work with him on a chapter of my new book, and he's taught me so much because that guy's been through hell, right?
Yeah,
and has sort of come back, and he's taught me a lot about how to deal with adversity in life. So I think those relationships that you make away from the camera are kind of the best things about the business that people don't see on TV.
That's like, we've also heard a lot of stories about obviously Jonathan, and it's an amazing story. So he's somebody that maybe inspired you to maybe be a better person. So not only is your favorite moment about yourself, but it's about somebody inspiring you to be somebody different or be somebody better, I guess.
100%. 100% is that if you think, we're going through a rough time now where, okay, so I don't have sports to talk about, and I'm not on TV, and my entire business is in a difficult situation right now. We don't know how long it's going to last, whether we're not going to get hockey and basketball and all those things back for 3 months or 6 months or a year. Who knows, right, at this point in time? So that seems like a big deal, and it is. But then you think about, what Jonathan went through, just trying to survive every day. That puts things in perspective for you. Yeah. And I think that teaches you a lot about what's important and what you can control, what you can't control, and just gives you a better perspective on life.
Yeah. I'm going to throw it kind of back to sports here. Talk about, we don't have sports for a little while now. How do you think that this whole pandemic that we're going through right now, how do you think it's going to affect the UFAs that are currently kind of at the end of their deal with their respected teams? How do you think that's going to kind of affect that whole wave in general of new UFAs?
I was just talking about that on the phone with the insiders, like with Bob and Dregs and LeBron a little while ago, and I don't think anybody knows 100% for sure. They're still there. This is so complicated for them. This is like nothing that any of these leagues have ever had to handle before. Not just the logistics of trying to come back and finish the season, which personally I think is probably impossible at this point in time, until you have a kind of test where you can test somebody instantly. I don't know how they even cocoon these guys in a certain place, like they were talking about with baseball or hockey, and put them all in a bubble somewhere and let them play. I don't know how you do that. So there's all those issues. And then you're right, like questions about free agents and how do you do the draft. And I don't know that they've quite figured it out yet. I really don't. And those discussions are going on hours a day between PA and league and agents. And I don't really think they know right now. I think, first of all, you have to figure out if there's going to be a season or not. If you cancel the season, let's say mid-May, they figure out that they can't do it. It's not going to be possible. So as soon as you cancel the season, I think then you can sort of go about your regular business of saying July 1st or whatever the day is going to be free agency, and you conduct the business normally. But salaries are all tied to revenue. So if your favorite player signs a 8-year, $80 million deal, and then it's not going to be 8 years and $80 million, right? It's going to be, because it's all tied to revenue, and that if there's no hockey next year, you're going to see salaries just shrink massively, I think. Yeah. So it's a really good question, and I don't really know, and I don't think they really know yet.
I have another kind of question here. I have a question here also. Because of you were talking about revenue and all that heading in, how do you think this is affecting the new Seattle expansion that was supposed to come in later in the next 2 years? Do you think that'll kind of extend it, or do you think that they'll kind of announce it as planned?
I think that that's a possibility. I think they'll come in. I think they'll find a way to get them in. I think when you're planning something that big and you have an arena and a team ready to go, to delay it by a year would be problematic. Again, I think that, Matt, once you get through this, once you finish dealing with this season, that you can kind of go about normal business, hoping for a season next year. And again, I think the biggest question right now, Matt, and it would take financial people smarter than me, is can you play a season that maybe has no fans in the crowd for half the season, a third of the season, the entire season? Can you do that as a business and survive? Are your TV revenues enough? Your advertising revenues enough to do that? I'm not sure that they are, and so that's the big questions. A sport like football makes so much money that they could probably play all of next season with no fans, and they could get by. And the NBA is similar. The NHL is a little more dicey that way. Yeah. And I'm not sure if the business model will work for that. And so again, I think they're trying to come up with all these mathematical formulas of how to make it work. Yeah. But I think Seattle will be okay for the next year.
And then with the teams that maybe are in this state of bankruptcy, even last year, like a team like the Florida Panthers or a team like the Arizona Coyotes, who have risk of maybe being either taken off the NHL teams or being relocated, does that up their chances of maybe you won't make it to next season?
Yeah, I think that's really valid, Braden. I mean, I think if they could somehow find a way, and I don't want to be a pessimist here. I still think there's possibilities. I do believe in the smart people around the world, and there are a lot of them. Everybody's focusing on this thing, and if you can somehow get an instantaneous test, and if they can come up in the next few months with some sort of drug combination that works to treat this virus, then maybe that opens the door to having mass gatherings more often and having more normalized sports faster. But there is no doubt that not finishing this season will hurt revenues, probably cost $1 billion or something like that. If next season gets severely impacted, then I think there's a handful of bubble teams whose survival will be definitely in jeopardy. Definitely, Gary Bettman has shown that he wants team to survive. He wants the league the way it is, and so they'll try bailout measures wherever they can, but you can only go so far, right? So I think that's one of the many issues they're definitely worried about, is those teams that are already in economic strife.
I'm just going to kind of point out there, I was actually just having that exact same thought that especially with Gary Bettman, how he wants the league to kind of survive the way it is. And I feel like that's kind of why he's, once again, kind of too scared to attempt other markets that have failed before, like Kansas City or Atlanta, especially with the Thrashers. And you mentioned again that teams can't survive without fans in the building, because the NHL generates a lot of revenue off of ticket sales. That's exactly right. If you look at a lot of teams right now that have low attendance, they're on the verge of collapsing financially. So I feel like this kind of pandemic will especially just kind of shred some teams apart, because they can't.
It's really daunting. Like the fiscal the financial numbers are really daunting, and that's why I said I'm really trying. It's really easy to get super pessimistic. Yeah. And when you have medical experts come on and say there's no chance of mass gatherings until fall of 2021, well, that's dire type scenarios for not just the NHL but a lot of these leagues. So I'm gonna try and stay hopeful that there's some scenario whereby maybe you start the league a month later, mid-November or beginning of December, and maybe by then we figured this thing out a little bit, right? So that we can test 20,000 people as they walk into an arena. Maybe that sounds far-fetched, but technology can happen fast. Yeah. In some places in China and South Korea, they test people for fevers as they walk into a building automatically, right? So maybe there's technology that'll catch up. I'm hopeful for that. That is, what are we, May, June, July, August, September, October, 5 months. This whole thing has felt like an eternity, and it's been a month, right? So maybe in 5 months or something, we figured things out. I'm going to try to stay hopeful that that's the case and we get some semblance of a season next year with actual fans.
Okay, well, thank you so much, James, for again coming on the podcast. And, we obviously appreciate it. It's a huge honor to have you on. We're just trying to gain a few followers.
No problem, boys.
So yeah, we thank you so much.
What's the podcast called?
Underrated Podcast.
The Underrated Podcast?
Yes.
All right, I'll give you like a tagline you can use in your audio or whatever, right?
Thank you. And I don't know if Matthew has any.
Hold on, you got to be quiet for a second. You got to do it. All right, hold on. I'm James Duthie. Listen to the Underrated Podcast with Braden and Matt.
You heard him, folks. You gotta hit that subscribe button if you're on YouTube, or
exactly.
I don't know, whatever follow button, wherever this is on. Now you gotta hit the subscribe button.
All the best, guys.
Down here.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
All right.
Thank you.